Okay, thanks everyone, and thank you for joining us for this 2011 NATA results webinar, where we'll be highlighting the NATA results at the national level and showing you how to get the results in your specific area. I'll be covering background information on NATA, the prerequisite limitations, review again the methods that we use to develop the data, and then I'll hand it over to Ted, who will go over the national results, and then to Mark Morris, who will be providing you a demonstration on the NATA map application and showing you the website as well. So NATA, the 2011 NATA was released in December of 2015, and this is the fifth NATA. NATA is EPA's ongoing comprehensive evaluation of air toxics in the U.S. We provide concentrations, exposures, and risks based on air quality modeling of the emissions from the 2011 National Emission Inventory, or the NEI, and this is for the hazardous air pollutants, HAPs, in the Clean Air Act, plus diesel particulate matter. NATA is a screening level characterization. We provide the results at census tract resolution. The risks are for cancer and non-cancer for those HAPs that have this health data based on chronic exposures, and we provide ambient concentrations for all of the HAPs that we model. The key uses of NATA are to focus, prioritize, and look further into locations of interest, pollutants of interest, and emission sources, and to inform monitoring programs. So here are the prerequisite limitations. As you know, that the NATA includes just outdoor pollutants, outdoor sources, not indoor, and the inhalation route for exposure based on chronic exposures. The results are more uncertain at finer geographic scales. As you know, many of the emissions are county level, like the non-point and the mobile source emissions, and we use spatial surrogates to get them, to allocate them down to the census tracts, and I'll have a slide that goes through the allocation in a lot more detail. And because we report the results at tracts, but the emissions, some of the emissions are at the county level, that's why we warn against using the data at the high resolutions. Rather, look at a series of tracts that are in a geographic area, not just focus on one specific individual tract. Also, the results are based on model data, not ambient monitoring data. We do use the ambient monitoring data for model evaluation, but it is not used in the risk results. Also, we warn against comparing risks across different areas of the country because the emission inventories vary across those areas. HAPs are voluntary. Hazardous air pollutants are not required to be reported to the NEI, and the underlying hazardous air pollutant emissions data can vary in level of detail and completeness from state to state. I'll show you how we try to gap fill to make the inventory as complete as possible, but still there could be variations from state to state. Also, NATA results shouldn't be compared to previous NATAs. The purpose of NATA is not to do risk trends. We use ambient monitoring data, or NATS network, National Air Toxics Trends Network for trends, not those model data. And that's because in addition to emissions changes, there could be changes due to different modeling techniques, emissions processing techniques. We certainly used a different approach for this NATA that I'll be going over in the methods section. So many folks use NATA. EPA, we have several offices that use NATA. We in the Office of Air Quality Planning and Standards use it in our report to Congress for monitoring our National Air Toxics Trends Network. Pollutants are based on what we find in NATA for pollutants that are priority pollutants. Our Office of Transportation and Air Quality, OTAC, uses it as background for their national rules. Our Office of Research and Development is putting it into the Community Focused Exposure and Risk Screening Tool, C-FIRST, and the Office of Environmental Information also is using it. It's going into EJ Screen. The most previous version of NATA was 2005, so we're updating it with this. They're updating it with the 2011. States and local agencies out there use it for setting priorities, also for identifying gaps in emission inventories and and encouraging inventory improvements in areas that the NATA indicates that you might want to focus on. We've also found over 100 papers in the academic world that has referenced NATA in numerous health studies. And now I'd like to walk through the methods. Note there is a technical support document on the NATA website that goes through in a lot of detail the approach that we use to develop the risk values. We start out with the emission inventory. We use the 2011 NEI version 2. You can see in the yellow box we have point, non-point, mobile sources, biogenics, and fires. All of these emissions are fed into the CMAQ model, which is a chemical transport model, and then we feed most of the emissions, everything but fires and biogenics, into the AirMod model. These are our two air quality models that we combine the results of, and that is a change from previous NATAs. So we use something called the hybrid approach, as this is box at the bottom here, where we're combining the annual concentrations from both of these models so we could take advantage of the long-range transport and chemistry offered by CMAQ, and then the fine scale, the more detailed spatial resolution that you get from AirMod. Note that we run all the HAPs through the AirMod model. For those that don't go through CMAQ, we add background concentrations based on ambient monitoring data. For those that do go through CMAQ, the 40 HAPs, we run the hybrid approach. Then we send those modeled ambient concentrations to an inhalation exposure model, in which case we're applying exposure ratios. And then we apply the health data for the approximately 140 HAPs with cancer non-risk estimates to get a risk characterization. And we do a model performance evaluation on the ambient concentrations, and that is in the TSD, technical support document. So some features of the NEI, it contains both hazardous air pollutants and criteria air pollutants. The CAP, called criteria air pollutants, are required to be reported by states from the AERR, the Air Emissions Reporting Rule, but the HAPs are voluntary. So most of the data, as I said, from the NEI comes from state, local, tribal agencies submitted to our Emission Inventory System, EIS, which we started the 2008 NEI with. And the inventory includes emissions for point sources, the point data category, or facility level emissions like power plants and pulp and paper plants, for example. Non-point, these are mostly at the county level emissions. These are the more ubiquitous sources where we don't know where exactly each one is, such as residential wood combustion, commercial cooking operations, solvent use, consumer and commercial products. And then we also get mobile model inputs for the MOVES model or for the NMIM model, which is what we use for non-road, and then we run those models to determine the emissions, both hazardous air pollutants and criteria pollutants for non-point and mobile. We also have in the emission inventory system facility configuration data. That's really important for modeling because the concentrations from AirMod depend on the release parameters, the stack heights, the velocities, etc. And so all of that is in our emission inventory system. And what it does is you're able to lock a latitude and longitude geographic coordinates. So once we find that we have good data, we could lock them so they don't get overwritten. And that's a real benefit of EIS, and we've used that for NATA. And all of the corrections that we have, we've put back into EIS. As I said, HAPs are voluntary, so EPA does gap fill HAPs from other databases, such as the Toxics Release Inventory, which are facilities reporting to the Office of Environmental Information, or OEI, for that database. Note that in the TRI, we don't have the more detailed release point characteristics. We know what's a stack and a fugitive, but we don't have the specific stack heights and stuff like that. But we do use it, again, for gap filling to get the most complete inventory we can. We also compute HAPs from CAPs for state-reported criteria pollutants. We apply ratios based on emission factors of HAP to CAP, so we can gap fill that way. Also, we speciate chromium into hexavalent and trivalent. If we get total chromium, we also accept hex and trivalent chromium to be reported into EIS. And then we estimate emissions for numerous non-point categories and fires through the Smart Fire model with input submitted by states. So as I said, NATA could be used to look at emission sources of interest, and to enable that, we provide our risks and ambient concentrations by the source groups. As you can see, they're very detailed. We have a large number of on-road and non-road groups, so we break out, for example, the heavy-duty diesel, which could be important for certain pollutants like formaldehyde, and on-road light-duty gasoline, which is important for benzene. And then you can see we have numerous non-point groups broken out. For point, we have airports and rail yards separated from other point sources. And we also only modeling in CMAQ the fires and biogenics, but we have those broken out. So you can see the contributions of those. And biogenics are emissions of vegetative sources, and they emit formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and methanol. Those are the key HAPs. And of course, VOC and NOx for CAPs. We also have secondary formation. This is not an emissions group. It is obtained from the air quality modeling using CMAQ, which does the chemistry, and secondary formation produces formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein, which are very key HAPs, as you'll see later in the results. So as I told you, I was going to talk a little bit about spatial allocation. Again, this is why the results are more uncertain. This is our limitation at the finer scales. And really the key here is not the point. The point are modeled at their actual location for AirMod. But the non-point, non-road, and on-road, which are provided as county-level emissions and then are allocated into tracts. And some of these surrogates that we use, we try to get data that across the U.S. that will indicate where these emission sources may be, such as for on-road start emissions, we look at parking areas. Well, we don't exactly have a parking area surrogate, so we use a combination of local, of where people live, of population, and local roads to get at that. I also want to point out commercial marine vessels. Starting with the 2008 NEI, we have shapes for those. So not only are they reported at the county, but there's actually sub-county level shapes, and we use those in our AirMod modeling for characterizing those. So we don't, previously in the 2005 NATA, we allocated from county to tract where these commercial marine vessel emissions may not actually be. So here we have shapes for port and underway. For CMAQ, we're allocating to our 12 by 12 kilometer grid cells, and we're also allocating vertically for those sources that have that are not just in layer 1, that have plume rise, such as the point sources and the fires. So here's an example of a port shape that we use for commercial marine vessels. Actually, we have to simplify this because there's just a lot of jagged edges here. We do use the shape to input into AirMod. We have about 370 port shapes, 3,500 underway shapes. Those are the water areas. And we assign them to shapes in the NEI, and those could be reported, shape level emissions reported by state agencies, or we have also allocation that we could help folks to submit emissions to put them into those shapes. Note that the PM emissions from the diesel and residual oil-fueled vessels are modeled as diesel PM, and this category is one of the key for diesel PM. Other key pollutants are nickel, hexchrome, arsenic, and formaldehyde. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the hybrid approach and conceptually what's going on here. Well, what we're doing is we're modeling each of these AirMod receptors. These are census block centroids. We do aggregate up the tract, but we have this census block centroid resolution within each and every CMAQ grid cell, and that gives us our spatial granularity. And so we could have different levels of concentrations in here within the grid cell. And what we do is our hybrid concentration is based on the air mod concentration normalized to the CMAC value for the cell. So we multiply this air mod by the ratio of the CMAC to the air mod average for this grid cell. And then we add those sources that are not modeled in air mod, which are the fires, the biogenics, and the secondary formation. These are the air toxics that are modeled in CMAC. There's approximately 40 of them. They're the key mobile HAPs and many important stationary HAPs as well. And this is the hybrid equation. This is the part where we're normalizing the air mod concentration at each census block centroid by the ratio of the CMAC to the air mod average for that grid cell. Here we're adding in the secondary component from CMAC, the fires, and the biogenics. And this equation, we run this equation at each of the 6.6 million census block centroid receptors, and we also include additional receptors as well. And then at the 56,500 grid cells that are in our continental U.S. domain. Now I'd like to pass it on along to Ted to provide the results.
Thank you, Madeline. Excuse me. That was a really good overview of NATA. I know a lot of you have already heard that a couple times, but we thought it was important to get everybody on the same page as we move forward through the results. And as Madeline pointed out, NATA is a screening analysis, and it was developed really to identify pollutants and sources and areas of interest for further study. And I'm going to look at those from a national level. Let's go to the next slide, Mark. We're going to look at those from a national perspective, but the slides that I'm going to show you here, you really can do for your own state, your own region, or community, or whatever geographic scale you really want to do that down to, obviously down to the track. Because the data, I use the data specifically right off the website to make these charts. So you need, even though I have other data internally, you don't need any of that to make these pie charts and maps and everything that we're going to show you in a few minutes. So I'm going to go over some national results, and then Mark will take it over. Mark Morris will take it over and drive through the web app and show you how to do a couple tricks with that, so we can look at some local areas of interest as well. Okay, so let's start out by saying what pollutants were driving the risk nationally. And you'll notice in there I have the national risk of 40 in a million. And, you know, what does a national risk mean? Really not a lot, actually, to be honest with you. That means the average person in the country is exposed to about 40 in a million risk. But as we know, you know, any given community or town could be higher or lower than that number is itself. But from a national perspective, and I think you'll find this in many states, especially in the southern states, where you have a lot of photochemistry going on, formaldehyde will tend to drive your cancer risks. And nationally, it's about half of the cancer risk. Another photochemical pollutant that Madeline had pointed out, acetaldehyde, is about 11%. But so between the two of them, you got almost 65% of the national cancer risk is coming from photochemically produced pollutants, which are greatest in areas where you have high photochemistry, like the southeast U.S., the Southern California region, Texas maybe. Just think where the areas of high ozone are. That's generally where you will have the high formaldehyde and acetaldehyde formation. In fact, formaldehyde is actually formed from many precursors. Some of those are anthropogenic, some are non-anthropogenic. It depends on the season and whatnot. But so that's not all coming from man-made sources. There's terpenes and other things, and Madeline could correct me, coming from trees, biogenics pretty much, yeah, that form the formaldehyde.
Ted, why isn't diesel PM in the pie chart?
That's it. The question was, why is diesel PM not in the pie chart? Good question, Darcy. The EPA does not have a unit risk estimate for diesel particulate matter. We do look at diesel PM, you'll see in a second, for non-cancer, but we do not look at it from cancer. We do provide on the website the ambient concentrations and exposure concentrations for diesel PM. So for the states that do have a unit risk estimate, I know California does, and then other states use the Cal EPA UR8. You're welcome to do that, but the EPA does not have that value. Talking to our folks in the Office of Transportation Air Quality, obviously we believe that diesel PM is a carcinogen, but we don't have sufficient enough data to actually quantify that level.
And before you go on with the risks, there's a question online. Why was the equation normalized instead of just adding air mod and CMAQ values?
Because then we'd be double counting.
Right. Yeah. Well, we kind of went out to make sure that we're not using the two models and adding them together, and you really have to be careful not to double count from between the two models. So, okay. And it's all covered. If you really want the gruesome details, look in the technical methods document. I'll show you in a couple slides where to find that. But it's painstakingly detailed, and Madeline went over it from a high level just for the sake of time. So you can always, any question that we don't answer here today, feel free to call myself or Madeline or Mark Morris, email us, phone us, whatever works easiest for you guys, and we'd be glad to talk NATA all day to you. Okay? So looking at that pie chart, though, we still have, and benzene is about 13%. You'll see carbon tetrachloride on there. Carbon tetrachloride is actually, there's very, very few emissions of it in the U.S. It's coming from internationally transported pollutants. If you go to all the carbon tet monitors out there, and that's actually how we come up with that value from monitors, it's really background. Every one of them is within a couple percent of each other as far as the value, the ambient concentration for carbon tet. The half-life of carbon tetrachloride is about 90 years. So this stuff continuously circles the globe, and obviously the concentration stays pretty level over there if it's not emitted anymore. And I'm not going to go through each one on there, but you can see a couple metals and pHs and whatnot are on there. And any particular area you look at, obviously you'll have different pi that would suit the emissions in your general area. But I suspect that many of the pollutants you see in here would be in your local region as well. Let's go to the next slide. The next slide we go over the non-cancer risks, and nationally the non-cancer risks is about 2. And so with the whole U.S., about 3/4 of that is driven by acrolein. Acrolein comes from natural and non-natural man-made sources, the biggest being mobile sources. I'll show you the source sectors in a second for the non-cancer so you can see where that's coming from. But acrolein is by far the largest non-cancer. It's about, itself, it's over 1, I think it's 1.3 or so, 1.4 of that 2 that you're looking at right there. Acetaldehyde, another photochemically produced pollutant, and formaldehyde are up there as well. Notice now that the diesel PM is on this pie chart. We do have a reference concentration for diesel PM, so we include that in our non-cancer respiratory. You'll notice also that this chart is for respiratory. We have several non-cancer target organs that EPA looks at. From a national perspective, respiratory is the only one really that has many tracks over 1.0, 1.0 being our safe level. If you want to get the target organs for other pollutants, you can go into the pollutant by pollutant tables that are on the website. For instance, if you bring up manganese, you'll get the neurological risks from manganese. So they're in the pollutant by pollutant tables, but we don't take all the target organs that are neurological and sum them together nationally. You can do that by going through the specific pollutants and doing that, but we haven't created national summary files for those just because there's only a handful of tracks nationwide that have non-cancer risks for these other target organs that are greater than 1. We just didn't feel it was worth the extra effort to put the national files up for those pollutants. The next slide shows our cancer, what we call our cancer drivers and contributors. What cancer drivers and if you look on the bottom of the slide, you'll see how we defined each one of those. Essentially, how important is this pollutant from a national or regional perspective, and what levels of of risk are we seeing, and how many people are actually at risk at these levels? And you see in the bottom there, the biggest one being the formaldehyde, as you would suspect from when I showed you that cancer pie a few seconds ago. It's over, it's greater than 10 in a million for more than 25 million people. I think that number's actually significantly higher than that. So it's one of our national drivers. And I'm not going to read each one there, but the bottom line is most of these pollutants, except for one or two perhaps, were on the 2005 NATA, National Cancer and Regional Driver list. You'll notice in here too that I don't put 2005 numbers up here and for the pies or anything to compare them to. What we trying to discourage people, and Madeline went over the methodology changes for you, but quite extensive between the 05 and the 2011 NATA, and there's a lot of improvements not only on the modeling side, but how we do the inventory, and so it's really not fair to kind of compare between NATAs. There's just so many changes that go on. Some of the risk reduction, in fact, the 2005 cancer risk was like 50 in a million. So Ted said, well, did cancer risk go down from 50 to 40? And the bottom line is I really can't answer that question from a national perspective because of so many methodologies. We'd have to go back and redo the 2005 NEI with the same methodology to have any chance of answering that question, and we just can't do that with the resources that we have available these days. So changes could be methodology, and next changes could be from reductions. So 5 to 11, there's a lot of residual risk standards, a lot of state air toxic reductions took place during that time period. So some of it could be real, some of it could be attributed to methodology changes.
Before you go on, we have a question on the previous slide about the respiratory HI. Can you expand on the explanation of why respiratory is the focus?
Yeah. The reason we focused on respiratory, we actually looked at all of them. There are 13, 14 different target organs that we look at from the pollutants that we look at. There's about 140 pollutants that actually have either a unit risk estimate for cancer or a reference concentration for non-cancer. And those, the way we look at cancer is we take all the carcinogens and group them together. The way we look at non-cancer is we actually group them by their target organs. So a pollutant that would have a neurological effect, we wouldn't add to a pollutant that affects the lung or a respiratory type pollutant. So we group them by their specific target organs. And respiratory was the only one from a national perspective that had hazard indices greater than 1 at many receptors in many locations nationwide. In fact, the average is 2. So a majority of the country is actually greater than 1 for respiratory. When we look at some of these other ones, there are tracks here and there, and that's why I said if you're a specific area, you can look at some of these other ones. It might be important if you're next to a large point source that emitted manganese or something on that order. You might want to look at the manganese values, and we do provide the respiratory and the neurological for manganese in the pollutant file for manganese. So you can look at it that way, pollutant by pollutant. We just did the national summaries for respiratory just because of the extent of the values over 1. Okay.
Although even if you we did look at neurological, and there were only, like you said, a handful of tracks that were greater than 1, right. And the highest was only 2.
Right.
So even if you look at specific tracks, it's not even much. Yeah, I think the 2 was the highest.
Mm-hmm. Mark, you bring out a good point too. I want to make sure I want to miss is keep in mind that NATA is done at a census tract level. Those of you familiar, we do with the risk assessment that we do for our residual risk assessment program, where we're looking at risks around industrial facilities generally. We do that source code by source code. We actually look down to a census block level. A block is a much finer resolution, about 40 residents or so at a block, and a tract's about 4,000. So it's about a factor of 100 difference between. So there may be higher values at some of those blocks for some of these other target organs that we're not seeing at the tract level. They get smoothed out to the tract level. That's a good question, Lamar. Any other questions, Doris?
None.
Okay. So let's look at some of the source categories that are affecting the risks from a national perspective. Once again, you could do this locally. About half of the risk is coming from, as we showed you with the formaldehyde and acetaldehyde earlier, is coming from secondary formation. Background on this pie chart is defined as really the international. A lot of that is the carbon tetrachloride I mentioned. A lot of it's coming from international transport. Now that we're using the CMAQ model for long-range transport as well as the photochemistry, by using the hybrid approach, we were actually able to shrink down the portion that we had attributed to background from the previous natives, and we could actually attribute those to the categories that it's coming from, whether it's coming from mobile or non-point. The Gaussian plume model air mod that we use goes out about 50 kilometers, but the CMAQ grid cells, obviously 12-kilometer grid cells, can go out through the whole modeling domain through the lower 48. So we can track pollutants pretty far using CMAQ this time. So that helped us eliminate the background and distribute those risks into the appropriate source categories to get a better characterization of what source categories are driving risks. You'll notice on the pie chart, the big green, if you're looking at it in color, the on-road mobile, about 18% of the risk, and if you combine that with the non-road mobile, you get about a quarter of the natural risk is coming from mobile sources. On-road being cars and trucks and others on the roadway, and non-road being other non-road equipment, farm equipment and construction equipment and things like that, and ports and airports. Madeline showed you that slide earlier that had all the source categories. You could actually take these pie charts and generate the same information from the Access and Excel files on the website for all the 40 some odd subcategories that we have. But that pie chart can get pretty busy pretty quickly. So that's kind of why we grouped them into the major categories here. All right. Let's go to the next slide. That's cancer, the non-cancer. Once again, mobile is probably the biggest piece of the pie between on-road and non-road mobile. We have almost half the pie from mobile this time, which is telling me that some of that acrolein we showed you earlier that we're driving non-cancer, we could actually attribute that using CMAQ now back to the mobile source that it's coming from. So, that informs our Office of Transportation Air Quality folks, where they need to continue to do their homework to reduce risks from mobile sources. And you'll see the secondary is about a quarter, and fires actually pop up as 8% of the risk. Another big producer of acrolein is from fires, forest and wildfires that are here. Some of the other fires like house fires and whatnot, they're under the non-point sector, right? Yep. Okay. So this will be the prescribed and wildfires that you're seeing in this.
And ag.
And ag fires, thank you, that you're seeing in this in the chart here. That's 8%. Okay, from this next slide.
Do we want to talk about the hybrid? We have another. Okay.
Okay. Anything? You got another question?
No.
Okay, we're good. All right. The next slide is a national map. Like I said, Mark will show you this in a lot more detail in a few seconds. From a national perspective, if you looked at the cancer risk, if we had a cancer risk satellite up there somewhere, looking down, this is what it would look like. You can see the scale there on the right, and the 0 to 25 really in the upper Midwest, the upper mountain areas, and the southeast and the east coast and the west coast pretty much in the 25 to 50 range, and a couple pockets of 50 to 75 and so on in some of the urban areas you'll notice. You'll also notice some blue dots on there. Those are the urban areas that had at least one track over 100 in a million. And there are many, many fewer tracks this time than we had in previous natives. And
that you're comparing.
Yeah, I'm not comparing. Thank you, Mark. He has to slap me all the time for doing that. But the bottom line is, each native we think gets better and better as far as our science goes and our characterization of what's going on nationally. And you can see that the areas that pop up on that map you would generally expect. They're either driven, and each one of those is driven by a different type of source. Some of them are driven by point sources, some of them are driven by mobile sources. One of the things we noticed in mobile sources this time, when you look at your own area, you may notice as well, and we had extensive conversation with our Office of Transportation Air Quality folks on it, the new MOVES model that predicts the county level mobile source emissions. Very heavily weighs now a engine that once an engine's up and going, comes up to temperature, especially the newer engines that are on the road. And it does look at the whole. We do look at the whole fleet that's out there. So over time, that fleet actually turns over. So you get newer and newer cars all the time. But an engine that is warm and running, the emissions are significantly, orders of magnitude lower than an engine that is just starting up. So what we found out this round of NATA is we're not seeing the interstates like we did in some previous NATAs where you had emissions up and down the interstate. What we're finding is we're finding higher emissions in urban cores where you have a congregation of people starting their engine, like parking garages or places where people congregate and park for a couple hours and the engine's cool off and you start your engine and your catalytic converter's cool. During those first couple of minutes of starting up, the emissions are significantly higher, and I'm not the expert on this, so if you want to know more about it, feel free to give Rich Cook an email or a call in our Office of Transportation Air Quality. He'd talk to you all day about it. We're finding those emissions are significantly higher, so we're seeing high risks from mobile sources in urban cores now. Downtown areas, and if you zoom in on many of these areas, and Mark maybe could do this, you'll see parking areas and parking garages and things like that in these urban cores where you have the high risk. So that's why some of these actually pop up. Some of these small towns have a pretty big urban or pretty congregated area where people park, and we're finding high risks in those areas there. Same thing with truck stops and things like that. If you have a truck stop, we have a lot of trucks starting up or idling. We're finding high risks near truck stops as well. So the highways aren't showing up as well as they did in the past NATAs, but urban cores and parking and cold start areas are showing up. I just wanted to point that out. Okay. So the next slide goes over some of the data that you can find on the NATA website, starting with emissions data. You can get the emissions data at the county, at the facility, and all the way down to the facility release point. So if you want a quick compendium on what went into NATA, and as Madeline mentioned, this is mainly version 2 of the NEI, but we did take all sorts of comments from folks over the course of 6-8 months after that, and have incorporated those into the files that you'll see on the website. So it's a very good place to go to if you need emissions data quickly for your particular area. You can also get them through the web app, and Mark will show you how to do that graphically. We also have the ambient and exposure concentration data for about 180 pollutants up there, and these are broken down by the source categories as well. It's all at the track level, census track level. We do not put any of the census block level. Madeline showed you in the hybrid equation that we do some of the calculations at the block. The blocks are summed up to the track. So none of the block level data is available to the public, and in fact, a lot of it I don't even have myself. We just have the points at the block level. The non-point and mobile sources, we actually calculate them at the track level. So and then finally, for about 140 of those 180 pollutants, we do have, as I mentioned earlier, either unit risk or reference concentration or both. We do the cancer and non-cancer risks for those. And once again, we break it down by pollutant, by source group, and we express the risk as I've presented here as in a million, and the non-cancer as hazard indices for individual pollutants hazard quotient. Once you add up those HQs for different pollutants that affect the same target organ, you get a hazard index. That's how you do it. Let's go to the next slide. In fact, if you have any kind of terminology questions, on the left side of that, on the bottom left corner of the slide here, this is the NATA website, you'll see a glossary of terms. Click on that, and it defines pretty much every term, or most of the terms, hopefully. If there's something on there you don't see, tell us. it's a really good compendium of air toxic terms that you can look to quickly and find definitions, and I cut and paste them into reports all the time, things like that. There's also FAQs, frequently asked questions, that NATA to NATA, we continuously update those based on the questions we get, and do that. We have limitations. Madeline gave you kind of an overview of some of those on an earlier slide, and there's a little more detail on that on this side. The URL, in case you haven't gone into NATA, is at the top of the page there. If you're like me and can't remember long URLs or where to put the dashes or underscores and all that, if you go to www.epa.gov/NATA, it'll take you there. I think if you Google NATA, you get some other association of truckers or something, I forget. So we obviously hijacked the acronym from somewhere else. We got a question?
Yes.
Okay.
Will the NATA risk info be an EJ screen?
The question is, will the NATA risk info be an EJ screen? Yes, that's a good question. In fact, right when we released NATA, Madeline said at the end of December last year, we provided those results to our Office of Environmental Justice. They are in the process of updating EJ Screen with the new NATA data, among other things they're doing to it. So I believe their plan is to update EJ Screen annually, and they are expecting to release the next version of EJ Screen. I've heard May, but I'm not going to hold my breath on it, but sometime later this spring is what I was told, that the next version of EJ Screen will come out, and that will include the 2011 NATA data in there. Any other questions coming up?
Yeah, we have one request to mention that some local jurisdictions also have more detailed toxic assessments, more refined than NATA.
That's great point. Yep, and Madeline pointed out in the first slide, NATA is a screen. So if, for instance, in California, the MATE study, it's a great local analysis. If you have a local analysis in your area, by all means, NATA is not here to trump that. NATA is here to help focus pollutants areas and source carriers to look at, and those local scale analysis are exactly what we'd love to see spinning off from NATA. Some of the counties and areas kind of get a head start on us and do that, and thank you for that. Okay.
And Ted, I think you're going to get to this, but in the 2011 NATA part of the webpage, there are links to some of those local areas. Yep. And particularly for California, I believe.
I know we have a link to MATES. Was there anything else, Matt? I know Darcy Smith was talking about this. She actually worked to develop the website, so she knows every little piece of that website, upside down and backwards. Yeah, I know there's MATES on there. Was there any other ones on there?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I go off the top of my head, I can't remember which ones, but there are some local scale. And if there are more, absolutely send me an email, and we will put a link up there to them to do that. So if you have the local scale analysis that you'd like us to link to off the NATA website, we would be glad to add those to it and keep a compendium of local risk. We're full scale air toxic here, and we're promoting as much air toxic analysis as you have out there. So NATA, great question. Thanks, Mark, for passing that one along.
And Ted, before you go into the website more, we have another question from online. Use of the California diesel risk factor has a dramatic effect on the cancer risk pie chart and cancer risk in urban areas. How many states use the California diesel risk factor? And do you expect EPA to use California or a different factor in the future?
Yeah, that's a real difficult. You got like 3 questions here. I really couldn't tell you how many states are using it. I know some are. I couldn't quantify that number. If it's 2, 10, 12, I have no idea. But I talking to different states, over the years, I know that several actually use that. And I know there's several websites out there, the scorecard site, and some of the environmental groups that are out there use that factor as well. So the number's there. You can, we're making it available to use it. But EPA, like I said, with the data we have in hand, and the folks here in ORD just don't feel that they can quantify a number for risks. I couldn't believe, I couldn't tell you what that number would be if and when they did quantify that number. And I know it's a constant piece of conversation here in EPA, whether or not we could do that or not, and the conversation just continues as we go on in time. And I know as much as you know at this stage of the game. If someday, some direction we go that way, we'd be glad to bring it in. And you are indeed correct. If we use the California number on that pie chart, probably about 80 or 90% of that pie would be diesel PM, and the rest would be the other remaining 140 toxics that we have out there. It's a good question. It's a hot topic, and I wish I could give you more information, but that's really what we have today. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So now back to the website slide here, and you'll see on the slide also that we moved the previous versions of NATA. This is to dissuade people from comparing NATAs to NATA. If you went to the old main NATA web page, it said 96, 99, 11. They're all up there. And you can click on each one. We've now moved all the previous NATAs on the far right under quick links. That top bullet, you'll see previous versions of NATA. You can go in there. You still can get to all the data, but it's not as prominent this time. We're trying to move people towards the newer NATA, which sets me up for right in the middle of that page. You'll see under the blue bar there, the 2011 NATA assessment. If you click on the first bullet, you'll get all the results tables and that I just mentioned in the previous slide on emissions and ambient and exposure and risk. They're in Excel and Access. If you click on the second, you'll get the NATA map app that Mark will show you in a few seconds here. And finally, I mentioned I would show you the TMD, the technical methods document. If you want all the nuts and bolts detail, I think it's about 800-900 pages at this stage. Madeline Strum wrote every page of it, too. Is on that third bullet down there.
No, that's not true.
She wrote a big piece of it, I'll tell you that. That third bullet right there, you can really get in there and get into nuts and bolts. And like I said, if you can't find it in there, give us a scream, and we'll be glad to hunt it down for you or answer the question for you from there. So unless there's further questions on the results at a national level and the website, I'm going to now turn it over to Mark, who's going to kind of give you a quick demo and drive you through the web app. I know you've all seen some of this before. That Mark's going to give you a quick refresher to kind of get you going as he's getting set up here to bring the web app. Just give him a second here, and the map should appear on your screen as well. All right, Mark, it's all yours, buddy.
So hopefully everybody can see that. This is the same website we just saw in the slide. If you click on NATA map, you'll go to this page for the NATA map app, and at the bottom there's a quick start guide if you want to read that. It goes over most of the stuff that we've talked about, we'll talk about today, or have in past webinars about how to use the app. Of course, if you're male, you'll skip that altogether and you'll go up here to the icon and open it up. So today, since we've had, and most of you probably have already seen the app, either used it yourself or seen it in previous webinars, we won't go into detail about some of the basic things, but we'll show, and also mention that this is also available on mobile devices. Just use your browser on your mobile device and you can access this just as you can on your computer. So up here, there's all kinds of icons, and we'll go into most of them, I think. One of them up here on the right is the layer list. Looks like layers. We do have three main layers of data. We have emission sources, and as Madeline has pointed out, there are a lot of them, lots of different types. Stationary, you have point sources, and many non-point sources, like all of these. And you also have mobile sources, on-road, non-road, airports, and then there's the biogenics and fires, which were modeled in CMAQ, and we present here. We won't go into that, but they're at the CMAQ grid cell level. So I just want to point out, so we have these three layers of data: emission sources, the monitors, and the risks, which we have, again, cancer risk, respiratory hazard index, and we also show the ambient concentrations. So I just want to point out that all three of these layers are available. The data that supports this app, we've been asked by several people if they could get access to that data so they could do their own analysis or create their own maps. And you can on EPA's Environmental Data Set Gateway, or EDG, I know this site is hard to see because of the layout of the site, but if you go into this site and you type in 2011 NATA in the search box and click search, the top 3 hits will be the data for the 3 layers that are in the NATA map app. There's emission sources, monitors, and the risk and ambient concentrations. And if you want to download that data, you click on this website link, and what that will do is access the FTP site and download that zip file to your computer, and that file consists of the geodatabase that the app is based on, and also an ARC map document. So if you want to do your own work, you can do that. So back to the app, we're going to go to a specific area here, San Antonio. And one of the things that you probably would want to do is there's an icon up here. It looks like a bookmark, which is a bookmark. So any area you go to, if you want to continue to go to that area on future days and always have the same map extents, if you want to create maps always the same way, you can create a bookmark, and you see I've already done that. All you do is once you're here, you just type in a name. So you can see this one is the one we did, I guess, yesterday. So you can see some of the things that once you go to an area that might interest you are what, first of all, let's turn on. So we've seen the layers, and this other icon for legend actually shows what is currently being shown in your map. And so you can control what's shown by the layer list, clicking things on or off. What is on, you'll see the legend for in this legend. So if I, for example, want to see what the highest cancer risk, which is shown here with this yellow to brown color ramp, I can either visually look at it and I can see that the darkest represents greater than 100 million. So I can click on that and we'll get a pop-up for every layer that's in the map. We'll get a pop-up for, so we get the cancer risk pop-up, and you can see the risk is about 80 in a million. And you can see the breakdown for the different source types. And at the bottom, we have pie charts with similar but more information. We have the source group breakdown. You can see most of it here is from on-road and also some from secondary. The next pie chart gives you a breakdown based on pollutants. You see most of it's from aldehyde, a little bit of acetaldehyde, so on. And we also have breakdowns for the other source types. Now, if it weren't so easy to see, if this darker brown were actually one of these lighter brown, you may not be able to tell by looking at the map what the highest risk is. So we have several queries up. We have a query for risks, which is we're highlighting here, if it will come on. There we go. We have a query for emissions and also a query for monitors. So if I wanted to find the highest risk tract in the San Antonio area, I can click this and I can search by cancer risk level.
That could be everything over on that visible map, or?
Yeah, that's one of the choices. So here you can pick either total risk or whatever criteria you want to use about a risk value. I'm just picking 50 because I don't want to return every tract, although probably most of them will be returned. Let's make it 60. So if I just do this and don't use a spatial filter to limit features, I'm going to get everything in the country that's above 60. Okay. So instead of doing that, you have two choices. You can use the map extents, which is everything we see in the map, or you can pick your own shape. I can pick this rectangle, and let's just do that. I'll just draw this rectangle. And then the last thing is choose whether to add this result as a layer, and you always want to do that. I can't think of a case where you wouldn't want to do that, because if you do that, you'll see after it runs, well, we only have the one. Maybe I should have gone back in. But I'll leave it as it is. So once we do that, you see that it actually added our query result layer here. And if I want in any layer, I can use the menu, the drop-down, and open up the attribute table. And move this around. So you'll get all your results at the bottom. And again, this is the same track that we saw. The total risk is 80 in a million. If you want to download that data, you can go, while you're in the attribute table, if you go to the far left under options, You can export this as a CSV file. You can do that. More than likely would send to your download folder. So it's just an easy way to, you can, if you want to do math on the data that you have that you can't do in the app, you can download it and use it in something else.
Mark, what's causing the risk in that tract?
Well, let's click on that. Let me get rid of this query.
You look in that Excel file, too.
I could have.
Let's look at your pretty pie chart.
I'm going to look at the pie chart.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm going to look at the pie chart.
The problem with live demos.
There we go. Okay, I'm just going to go to the pie. Let's see. So it's on-road. So we can see most of it's on-road and some secondary. So let's look at the on-road, and we see it's formaldehyde. So within on-road, it's on-road heavy-duty diesel, which is 40.
Can you put on a base map so I could see?
Yeah,
let's see if we could find any heavy-duty diesel activity in this area. This is not set up.
So I'll do that slower. So one of these icons is the four square. Is the choice of base map. The default is this topographic base map, but you have multiple choices, and one is being mapped hybrid. And I guess what I see this Army airfield, but I don't, I guess there's diesel maybe at that, I couldn't tell you. But
the support vehicles or something. Looks like a truck stop somewhere.
There could be on the interstate. Could be there, I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I find, Mark, with my eyes, and everyone knows I'm deaf-blind. Sometimes I have to turn off the layers to see what's going on in the underlying map, because especially when the colors are dark like that, and it covers it up. So it's just
right. Yeah, you can do that if you want to turn off all the colors. You can do that.
Right.
Yeah,
you kind of zoom in like that and get a.
Or you could leave the ambient on because that outlines. You can see
tracks.
that.
Yeah, but, it's just some tricks that I found.
I suppose that could be a truck stop right there. But,
I think that's.
If you really wanted to know, we could do the street view, but we'll save that for later.
Okay. But yeah, there's some trucks there.
You can look at the surrogates, which are posted on the website.
Okay, so that's one way to query emissions. There are other emissions queries. You can, if you actually are looking for a specific tract, you can put that tract number in. This goes straight to that tract.
The 15-digit tract ID?
That's 11-digit, but
okay.
still hard to remember.
Yeah, really long.
And we've looked at cancer, but you can also query by respiratory hazard index and also by state and county if you want to get a little more specific. So let's do an emissions query. These are for point sources only, which are indicated here by the green triangles. So you can, if you have the EIS facility ID, you can do a query by that and either get the facility-wide emissions or emissions from all the individual emission points per facility. But we'll do this, what's called user-defined area. So here I'm just going to draw a polygon. Let's say I'm interested in all of the emission points that are roughly inside this highway.
It's got to be a contiguous shape, I suspect.
And the same thing we'll add is an operational layer. You can see it returned 19 facilities, and anytime you do a query, you'll get these little, not pop-up, but these boxes that give you the individual results. It's really not an efficient way of looking at the data, so I never look at it that way. I always just, since we added as an operational layer, we always have the option of opening up the attribute table. And something we have to be careful of is that there, on this attribute table, it says filter by map extent. If I were to extend this table up, I'll cover up some of my dots, and my features, it's hard to see, but some of my features in the table disappeared because I'm filtering only by what I see. So if you're doing a query like this specific, you don't want to really filter by map extents. I want to see, or at least see in the table, everything. So that's 12 features.
Even if you cover part of the polygon, it'll take it away?
Polygons are points, yeah, if you cover stuff up.
Okay.
Yeah. So just like before, if you want to download this data, you can do this by exporting to a CSV. You can do some things while you're here. For example, you can sort. Say we sort by a pollutant here.
Sources of benzene.
So I've sorted. So of these 19 facilities that I found within that highway, sorted them, I find the highest benzene emitting facility here, and I can just double click on that. It always goes in too far, but you can zoom out some, and you can see that facility.
Okay. Tank farm or something.
We could click on it, but in the interest of time, I think we'll move on. Because I just want to point out that these queries that we have built into the app are all for point sources. There's many other source types. For example, all the non-point and the on-road. So just want to show that there's a way that you can still query that data even though we don't have a built-in widget for it. So I'm going to turn on the commercial cooking layer, and what that is, as Madeline pointed out, everything but point. The emissions we had at county level and got allocated down to tracks. So if I click on one of these tracks, now that I have turned on commercial cooking, in addition to the other layers that we've seen, we'll also see a commercial cooking layer, which gives the emissions from that category in tons per year. But if I want to query that data, I can, just like before, I click on this drop-down, open up the attribute table, and I'm going to filter again by map extent. I don't want the entire United States. So I have under options, I can filter this data. For example, if I wanted to know all the tracks that had benzene emissions that are greater than 1/10 of a ton. And I can see it returns 7. So in this map extent, there are 7 tracks that have benzene greater than, from cooking, commercial cooking greater than 0.1.
Wow, 200 pounds.
So I just want to point out that even though we don't have a built-in query, you can still query things. Let's say the last, I'm going to do one more emissions query. I'm going to open up the facilities, open up that attribute table. And this one I am going to look nationwide. I'm going to remove this filter. So what we'll see is all approximately 57,000 facilities that are in the country, and I want to do a query on that. So I'm going to filter based on facility name, and I'm just going to generally say it contains DuPont. And you can see 41 facilities emit or contain DuPont. And we can do similar things. If we wanted to sort any one of these pollutants and find the highest or whatever, you could do that. You could also, you're not limited to one criteria. I can go in here and add other expressions, really as many as I want. If I wanted to limit it by population of the track, or well, it's not tracks, but some other criteria of these facilities. So we've done a risk query, an emissions query. Now we want to do a monitor query. So since we're in Texas, we'll do this. Now it's hard to see. Maybe if I turn off, well, I can see we have 3 monitors here, right? One in the west, one in the south, one in the east.
What's the symbol for the monitor?
It's the M. The M with the halo behind it.
Not a metro? Yeah.
No, it's not a metro stop.
Okay.
There could be a metro stop.
That's what I thought when I first saw it.
So I'm only into, I don't want to get data for all 3. I just want to get data for this one over here in the west. So I'm going to spatially limit by drawing this box around it. I'm going to add it as an operational layer. And you can see before I close this that we have 28 features found, and what that means is there are 28 pollutants that are monitored at this location. So we can do the same as before. Since it's added as a layer, we can go to the table, and this is all 28 pollutants. I can just look at them, sort them.
What monitoring data do you have in here, Mark?
The monitoring data is, since NATA is based on 2011 emissions data, and that's what the model results are based on, we have tried to get as much 2011 data in here as we have, and you can see here that we have some pollutants that we do have data for, some pollutants or we don't have 2011 data for. So we have 2011 that we really focus on, but we also have a recent year, and that recent year could be anywhere between 2005 and 2013. In this case, it's 2013. So we have a recent year, and we also have 2011 where it's available.
Okay. How far back did it go?
2005. Yeah, that's it.
That's all.
So we have this table of pollutants that are monitored here, and let's look at benzene, for example. We show the trends for this monitor. It's a PDF file that if you click on will come up, and you can see that it just goes back to 2007. The trend is down somewhat between 2007 and 2013. We can also compare the monitor to the model value by clicking in the tract, because in addition to cancer, we also have ambient concentrations. So if we look for benzene, you can see benzene is roughly 0.5 modeled, and here at the monitor, if you look at the median, it's 0.7 roughly. So this is a way that you can, if you do a query, you can compare for a specific monitor, you can compare the monitor values to the model values. Okay, let's do one more. We're going to one more monitor query. For the state of Texas, we're not going to look at that specific monitor. We're going to look for all formaldehyde in Texas. So we won't use a spatial filter. We already have, in effect, that by using Texas. So we have eight locations that monitor formaldehyde. I'm going to look at that table. So now we're looking at each record here is not a different pollutant. This is all formaldehyde, but these are different monitors. So we have 8 of these across the state of Texas. And what we can do, if we wanted to compare, we don't want to one by one compare these to clicking on the tracks. So we can take this file, we can export it, as we've seen, as a CSV file, and then we can turn around after we've done that and use one of these other widgets up here that all have the same icon, because they really do the same thing. They take point data that you input, and it plots them on the map, and then it attaches the ambient concentration. In this case, it attaches ambient concentration data to it. So if I click on that, I can select the CSV. Now, I didn't save that CSV that we just created from that query, but what I would do is select that CSV file and then run it, and what it would do is attach the data.
See, does it give you every pollutant, or you pick the pollutant?
We chose formaldehyde. You could,
so
yeah.
That'll pick formaldehyde.
Yeah. Well, no, it's going to give you every pollutant or ambient concentrations. Right. Yeah, you will have to pick out the formaldehyde column. Right.
It'll line them up there.
So just one thing that we should have noted, that something to be careful of is that two things. If you were to do that, this query that accepts your data and plots it and attaches data, it's looking for a specific name for latitude and longitude. So it will, while it will accept latitude or lat or point Y, it will not accept monitor latitude. So before I could use that file, I would have to go into that CSV file and take out the monitor word in both longitude and latitude.
Gotta fix that in the next version.
Next version, it will be done.
Yep.
It will be done.
And yeah, and as Mark goes through this, we're gonna, if you have any feedback, please send it to us, just as we, we will periodically update the NATA app and make improvements to it. Hopefully, even before we come out with the next version of NATA, if the resources are available, we'll keep improving it and making a tool that can help you get the data a lot quicker than Excel and Access files. That's for sure.
So the last widget I was going to use is this one here, which is get risk data for user point locations. So I am going to actually select a file here. We have a file, just a small sample of schools across the country that we created, the CSV file. So I will select that one. I'm going to change our base map back to the original. So what it's doing is taking, I have 8 schools in that CSV file. It's taken the coordinates and it's plotted them. And it's also, it says enriching, which means it's grabbed the cancer risk data. So for all the tracks that those schools are in, it's attached the cancer risk estimate for that track to that school. So, and I get a pop-up. So my pop-up, here's my school data, the name of it, and the coordinates. And here are the risk data that's attached to it. For example, this school total risk is about 80 in a million, the school in Denver, in the track that school is in. So you can also download, just like everything before, you download, and it's already done it, downloads it as CSV file. So we've talked about the queries, the 3 queries. We talked about how to add your own data and enrich or add the NATA data to your points. I don't have anything else to present. If anybody has any questions.
We do have a question from online. We've talked about point and non-point risks. Can you explain how the secondary and background cancer risks were developed?
Madeline, you want to try that one?
Yeah, sure. Well, the secondary concentrations were based on running the CMAC model. As you recall in the equation, we added them to each and every block receptor. And the 3 pollutants that are formed secondarily are formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein. And that's based on the photochemical reactivity of both biogenic and anthropogenic emissions. And it's not just TAP emissions. When we run CMAC, we run all the pollutants. So we've got NOx, we've got VOC, we've got all the criteria and the 40 hazardous pollutants. So the secondary cancer risks are based on the concentrations that we modeled, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, and acrolein that are secondary. Oh, acrolein is not cancer, it's a non-cancer. Right. So if you're looking at secondary risks, you know they're either formaldehyde or they're a combination of formaldehyde and acetaldehyde. Background is when we didn't have a CMAC cap. So for example, carbon tetrachloride, we actually did not use the CMAC. We used just the air mod, and we added to the modeled concentrations from air mod a background concentration based on remote estimates. And carbon tetrachloride is one of those pollutants. Most of the background is carbon. About 99% of it is carbon tetrachloride.
I think it's 8 out of 9% in my pie charts.
Yeah, so when you see background, think carbon tetrachloride. This pollutant is pretty much monitored uniformly across the U.S. It's not, we don't emit it anymore. It's really just there because it has extremely long half-life, and it's just kind of circulating the globe. So that's really the background cancer risk. But we have other pollutants that we do add background. They're just very low concentrations and very low risk. Carbon tet is pretty risky half.
I was just curious about the carbon tet at this monitor. I was curious about the the trend.
Year to year?
Should be pretty flat.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty flat. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty narrow range there, yeah.
0.45 microgram per cubic.
Yeah,
you're going to find that. That's our background, but it was like 0.547.
The lowest.
It was about 0.55 was our background. Right. And there's a whole appendix devoted to background in the technical support document.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Anything else up there, Darcy? Okay, this is your last chance. We have a few minutes left. If you have any questions you want to type quickly, we'll be glad to take them. Like I said, we're available. Pretty easy to get hold of us if you don't have our email. You know, it's last name dot first name @epa.gov, and drop us an email or whatever works best for you. And we will get the slides. And once again, I want to thank Mary for helping set this up, and the whole air toxic subcommittee with Tom and Renu and Michelle and folks that we meet with every other month have really been there since day one with us with NATA, developing this. I know they report back to you guys in your monthly meetings as well. So we really appreciate their help as we've gone through this whole process. This really, NATA would not exist if it wasn't for some of the support we've gotten from NACA, and we are much appreciative of your support and telling our upper management that this is an important tool for you guys as well as us, obviously. And once again, thank you for that support, and we hope that you find it useful moving into the future. Madeline, Mark, anything else you want to add? Second, Darcy?
I have a question.
All right, we got a typer here. Go ahead.
Are there estimates of the attribution of secondary risk to anthropogenic versus biogenic?
No, we did not. You really can't separate that out. I mean, we could run zero out runs, and we could try to do that. But the truth is that the NOx there's this very complex reaction in the atmosphere, and you can't. We're trying to work on some sensitivities outside, but you can't just do the zero outs and figure out how much is secondary.
What do you mean by zero out?
Zero out is when you remove a source from CMAQ, and then you look at the results of that source.
Yeah, so
and then
CMAQ doesn't give you the attribution as its result.
CMAQ doesn't give you the attribution. AirMod gives you the attribution. Because CMAQ doesn't give you the attribution, you can't break out. You can't break out the secondary.
I know those CMAQ runs take weeks to run too for the whole country. So.
Okay.
All right.
So the short answer is no.
We can't do it. Sorry.
Okay.
Good question.
We have another question with two questions. Does NATA include parking lots? And can we look at parking lots with the tool?
Yeah, I mentioned parking lots. That was one of our.
So did I. Yeah.
Yeah, it's because
with the cold starts, right?
That's where we tried to put the cold start emissions, the off-network emissions.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have off-network emissions as a category, but we have the on-road. You know what we could, and we have I guess we can. We have the surrogates. It's possible to look at the emissions from off-network by applying the surrogates, which are on the website. And,
percentage-wise, and I saw some of those numbers come from OTAC, that about two-thirds of the mobile source emissions is coming from the cold start portion of, correct me if I'm wrong, Madeline, cold start portion of its emissions. So, and that's why I said earlier, you're not seeing the major roadways anymore. You're seeing the places where cars are starting up. When in residential areas where people start up, well, everyone's in their own little driveway or garage or whatever, so they're spread out. But when they go to work and leave at the end of the day or go shopping or whatever, or go to an event of some sort, you have thousands of cars in a little area, and you get lots of emissions as those people start up their cars all in one little area.
So we have a surrogate that's off-network, which is not exactly parking lots, but it's supposed to, and what it's made up of.
Let me just, when you say surrogates, you're taking the emissions from a county and bringing them down to the tract level or smaller entity, right?
Yeah, we're attributing them to tract. Mm-hmm. And we have a surrogate called off-network, and it's actually comprised of commercial and industrial land, which is where people work, basically. Right. It's where, and plus, it's a combination surrogate plus population, which is where people would have, driving, not population, I think it's residential. I have also surrogate definitions, residential land.
But,
so we could get risks by that.
And what we found, if you look at NATA in a lot of these urban cores, boom, it's pretty much, the surrogate's been pretty spot on in urban areas where boom, there's a lot of parking, there's a big parking deck or several parking decks next to a major arena, something like that in downtown area or near a lot of businesses. And so while it doesn't exactly say parking, it does a pretty good job of finding the parking locations. And you could use the map app, you use Google Earth, anything like that. It's not spelled out in the map app.
Yeah, all I've done here is gone just on a query on cancer risk by on-road.
Okay.
And
you could click on one of those and zoom in. And you see
yeah, I just sorted them, and you could zoom in. Now, you're not guaranteed that it's going to be driven by parking lots, right? But
if it's on-road gas, it's most likely off-network.
Yeah.
On-road gasoline is.
Where are
you
we?
can't get the risk by.
Well, we could sort it by on-road gas.
You can get the emissions.
Okay. It's a great question, though. Thanks.
So let's just go to one of these 70s here.
All right.
So that's probably, I guess, the highest one.
Madeline, is more information about surrogates and the allocation explained in the technical support document? So if someone wanted to try to look for parking lots, they could get the best estimate by using information in the TSD?
Yes.
And
also you could call.
Surrogate files are there too, right?
Yeah, the actual surrogate data and how we assign them to the different inventory sources are there.
Yep. This one goes right through, this looks like a really busy intersection, right? Yeah, I-5. So I suspect that you got lots of on-road. I suspect there's parking right there as well. This is, you must be in LA or California or something. I suspect if I-5 is going through it.
If you get the risk by one of our source groups and want to know more detail of what's in the group, you can use the emissions for that. You could look at what's the highest emissions in that source group.
Okay. So yeah, it looks like there's some parking there, but you can't. I mean, you can use them. Some of the satellite data in the map apps, pretty good data.
Yeah, all it can really tell you is what is coming from on-road.
And that's why it's important that you know your own area. And if you see something strange, tell us. We could look into it. One of the things we're always trying to do with future natives is improve those surrogates. In my professional opinion, it's probably the weakest link in the analysis of the surrogates because of the uncertainty. Some of them do a much better job than others. And we continue, like I think in 11, we've done, they're so much better than the 05 surrogates were, and I think we'll just keep moving that way each time. I know we worked with some folks in Hawaii who actually helped us develop their own surrogates for them for certain attributes.
For lawnmowers.
For lawnmowers and things like that.
We could do that. Folks, if you have your own surrogates that you use for your own detailed modeling, we can take those.
We can apply them to your area, or state, or county, whatever you want.
It could be a county level. It could be state level. We could use those surrogates for the next NATA.
That's right. So, yeah, and your help on the surrogates would greatly be appreciated because that, like I said, that's an area where we definitely know we can improve. So, okay, anything else popping up? Look, I think we're just about at our time here at 2:30. Once again, thank you everybody for your attention. I know it was a long time to sit around and listen to us preach about NATA, but hopefully it was useful. And like I said, feel free to drop us a call or email if you have any follow-up. We will send the slides to Mary, and she can distribute it to you guys so you can have them for future reference. So thanks again for your attention, and have a great day, folks. Bye.
The lead